Good evening, everyone who's here. We're going to give it about a minute or so to let everyone join the room. Really excited about the conversation, but give us a minute or two just to make sure that we are allowing everyone into the room. I'm Adrienne Cole Johnson, and I'll be your moderator for the evening. Thanks for joining us. All right. Well, as folks are still joining, we want to start as close to on time as we can. And again, greetings and welcome to our civic conversations on literacy. I'm Adrienne Cole Johnson, and on a typical day, I wear many hats as a mom, a community engagement expert, social entrepreneurship, and literacy enthusiast. And so tonight, I'm pleased to join you and all of the other panelists this evening as we talk collectively about our passion for literacy, community engagement, and support for our youth and adults. As a child, I was really fortunate to have a family who valued the benefits of literacy and learning through every opportunity. My mom is a retired educator. My sister, who's like a second mom, really taught me and really instilled in me the love for reading. And I've been able to pass that down through generations, not only my own child, my own daughter, but throughout our community. And as stated by Nelson Mandela, literacy is the most powerful weapon which can change the world. And tonight we have some phenomenal partners who not only support the work of literacy starting at home, but also strengthening the support of families and community through literacy. All right. And so, as you all are still trickling in, I'm going to ask you to just answer this question in the chat to open us up. And so, what is your favorite literacy moment? Could be yours, could be a relative's or a friend's, but we'd love to hear from you in the chat. If you could ask that question, answer that question. What is your favorite literacy moment? All right. And just a few bits of appreciation. The Civic Action Conversation Series focuses on really critical topics in the area. And this is our third Civic Action Conversation of 2023, and it's brought to you by RVA Engage. So, just a quick bit about RVA Engage. It's a collaboration of community engagement professionals in the nonprofit sector, government, and educational sectors. They seek to inform and catalyze community members to engage in the issues that most impact our region. Tonight's event and the Civic Action Conversation Series is brought to you by the following community collaborators: the Bonner Center of Civic Engagement at the University of Richmond, Chamber RVA, the Community Foundation for a Greater Richmond, Plan RVA, Virginia Commonwealth University, and VPM. The Civic Action Conversation Series will focus on critical regional priorities and possible action steps for engagement. And the topics of this series are chosen because they reflect some of the highest priorities we've seen in our community. The series will seek to present multiple perspectives on each topic, and we invite you to listen, learn, and take action in a way that makes sense for you. All right. Now, I would love to see just a few things that we are sharing in the chat. Oh, I love it. You all are so engaged, and it's exactly what we're here for. I see the love and the smell of new books the same. I mean, while I enjoy audiobooks, I remember walking to the bus stop with my face immersed in books, and it was the smell that meant a lot to me. Starting a book club with friends, I see what someone has shared. Hey, Michael, with Henrico Education Foundation. I'm also seeing my favorite literacy moment is reading to my children out on our deck after checking out a stack of books from the library. Just really appreciate you all sharing such nostalgic moments that you've had. If you're still thinking about it and pondering it, would love for you to still drop it in the chat as others are really getting to know you a bit more as we continue to engage this evening. A little bit of housekeeping. Throughout the evening, well, first we're going to ask when you have questions to enter those questions into the Q&A portion, and then we will take a look at those questions and share out as many as we can. Resources will be posted throughout the program and will be in the chat. And so if you hear panelists share something, more than likely we'll be able to quickly share that in the chat for you as well. We are recording tonight's events, and it will be posted as a resource on the rvaengage.org site as soon as it's available. And so we'll send the link to all registered attendees an email alert just so that you know when it is available. All right. Next up, we are going to do a poll. And so I know we've all been doing Zoom meetings for a while. You should see something that is popping up on the screen. Thank you. So we've got 2 questions that we're asking you. First, whose responsibility is literacy? That's the first question. Whose responsibility is literacy? And the next question will be, why does literacy matter? We'll give it a few minutes to let you all respond, and then we will reveal the answers. Hoping that you all are all answering. Pretty soon we will have the results of the poll. Really curious to see how you all have responded here. All right. So not sure if you all can see the response, but for the first question, we have a resounding parents. Parents being responsible for literacy at 38%. Followed by that, we've got schools. And so essentially you've got about, oh, no, spoke too fast. Community and parents right there about 38%, which is full of parents and adults and guardians, right? And then we've got about 13% for school. So thank you for sharing. Panelists, as you're seeing these responses, would really love to hear from you all on that as we're making a mental note. Thank you all for participating there. Let's go to the next poll question and see what types of responses we had. And a thank you to, we've got so many people on the back end that are lifting us up through this full house in this virtual conversation. All right. So I'll wait to see if the second poll question will pull up on the screen as well. Okay. Oh, I think I missed it. We'll keep going. Team in the back. Okay. Thank you all for putting it back up for me. There it is. Why does literacy matter? Wow. 63% improves lives by increasing capabilities. And even as I'm thinking about some of the comments that were listed about favorite literacy moments, it really was times where you were able to enhance your quality of life, whether for yourself or for a family member, increase connection that you have also. And so not surprised at all with the 63% response of improves lives by increasing capabilities. A lot of other responses, but even as I look at the options, I really feel like that one captures a lot of the other responses there. So thank you all so very much for participating. We will likely have another poll towards the end of our night together, and just really appreciate you all participating there. All right. As we mosey on along, we are going to jump right into some of the meat and potatoes of our conversation this evening. And so we always start with a speaker. I am honored to read her bio, and Diana, you're more than welcome to come on the screen as I do so. Dr. Diana D'Amico Palowitz is a historian of education policy and social reform and an associate professor at the University of North Dakota, a visiting scholar at the Bonner Center for Civic Engagement at the University of Richmond, and an editor at Made by History. Diana is the author of many scholarly articles and newspaper essays, and she's edited a book on teachers' unions and the award-winning book, Blaming Teachers, Professionalism, Policies, and the Failure of Reform in American History. Welcome, Diana. I'm going to mute and let you speak to our audience. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, it is so terrific to be here with all of you, and I'm looking forward to spending a little bit of time. And I'll let our folks in who are coordinating all this pull up the first slide, and I'll go ahead and get right to it. Okay, well, there we are. So the title of my talk tonight is Literacy, Public Education, and American Democracy. And so let's get right to it and move into the first slide. So many of us joining this event tonight embrace intuitively and professionally the fact that literacy is powerful, right? Literacy, of course, is a private good. It benefits us as individuals in infinite ways. It's how we learn, how we imagine, how we connect, how we create, and much more. This is the kind of thing you're all reflecting on in the chat when you share your favorite literacy moment. But what I really want to focus our time together on is the public value of literacy, how literacy benefits our civic good, and the idea that literacy supports the essential fabric of our democracy. Now, of course, literacy is not just happening in the public schools, right? Indeed, literacy is happening in many places, in our homes, in our public libraries, on airplanes, elsewhere, right? But I want to make the case this evening that thinking about literacy and public schooling is especially useful for us. Not only are we in a moment where debates about literacy and public schools are overlapping, but in these debates, we see spilling out before us some of our most fundamental anxieties as a society. And there's a lot at stake in these debates, right? Of course, on a very important level, we're concerned about how individual kids learn to read, but in how these debates play out and get resolved, we should also be very concerned about the polarization of our society. Now, as this next slide depicts, the most recent wave of concerns over literacy in public schools are occurring in kind of what I think of as a perfect storm, right? We have NAEP scores that show a mixture of drops and stagnation across the US. We have fierce debates over pedagogy, right? Balanced literacy, science of reading, and we have the politicization of what kids are reading, right? As critics are running to ban books that feature difficult moments in history, people of color, LGBTQ plus people. There are two things to me as a historian of education policy that are especially clear and that I want to share with you. The first truism, if you will, is that education reform is social reform. When we turn with panic to the public schools about curriculum, whether it's literacy or science or history, we're turning to the schools in the hopes of addressing some kind of social, economic, cultural problem. The second truism is that we have long understood the power of literacy for individuals, but even more so for communities and for the nation. And over our time together, I'm going to take some moments to share examples with you that animate those points. My goal for today is to help us think about the power of literacy in public schools for society and to discuss what's at stake when the polarization takes hold for kids, for teachers, and for communities. And I guess it's kind of like a spoiler alert here. What I am calling for is an expansive view of the power of literacy for the public good. And while there are many factors that are critical to achieving this, as far as I'm concerned, none, perhaps none, are more so important than finding a common ground around the importance of well-funded and equitably resourced public schools. So let's get into it, into the fun part, and let's go to our next slide. So the Puritans, right? We're going to go way back. The Puritans who arrived in the northeastern coast of the United States came for a very different set of reasons than those who initially came to what would become Virginia, right? They were coming to build communities and lives here. They're searching for religious freedom and to build a future. Literacy and education played a very important role in their endeavor to build and safeguard their community. What's on your screen now is an excerpt from what is one of the first education laws in this country. And so you can skim through that, but I'll summarize it for you, right? So you can see you're fearful of that old deluder, Satan, right, who's running rampant, especially when kids can't read. That law is calling on communities to hire a teacher when they get to 50 families, and then to open a school when they reach 100 families. And so what we see in this early law is how schools support social cohesion and the value placed on a literate citizenry. Now, the fear, of course, here in this law is that if kids can't read the Bible, well, they're going to be susceptible to other views and beliefs. And all of a sudden, the sacrifice their families made to come here and build this cohesive community, well, that could all be vulnerable. On this next slide, we have an early textbook. Through resources like this one, schools and teachers imparted key lessons in literacy, right? So here you see the alphabet. But in teaching that, they're also imparting what for them would have been even more important lessons. And these are ones rooted in the sort of Christian morality. So I'll read a couple out loud, right? So A is for in Adam's fall, we sinned all. H is for my book, right? The Bible, of course, and heart shall never part. So from early on, we are seeing how literacy and this notion of the civic good are entwined. Precisely because of the power of literacy for the individual and for the community, right? For the private and the public values of literacy, we also see something else historically, and that is the attempt to prevent some people from becoming literate. This has played out in large and small ways, but none more tangible or extreme than the anti-literacy slave laws. And so let's move to the next slide to take a look at one from Virginia. Across the South, laws like this one emerged. So Virginia is not at all alone. And I'm going to just summarize parts of this for you. So Section 4 of this law establishes that it would have been illegal in the Commonwealth for enslaved or free African Americans to gather anywhere with the purpose of teaching, reading, or writing. And if they were found guilty, the consequence would be 20 lashes. Section 5 establishes further that any white person who gathered with enslaved or freed African Americans for the purpose of providing instruction in reading or writing would be fined $50 and imprisoned for 2 months. So why would they want to bar literacy? Precisely because of its power, right? With literacy comes understanding, communication, the ability to make change, all things that could make a society built on slavery quite vulnerable. The slave law that you see here is from 1831. The original was actually created in 1819. This one was updated and strengthened, I want to add, following Nat Turner's rebellion. Turner, of course, had taught himself to read. In spite of these laws and the harsh brutality that was used to enforce them, we know that enslaved and freed Black people risked their lives to learn to read. And on the next slide, we see a famous quote from Frederick Douglass. But of course, there were many others whose names we may never know who fought this fight here. And so Douglass, in his narrative, writes, "Once you learn to read, you will be forever free." So what does this episode add to our understanding of literacy? Well, it's not just that literacy is powerful for individuals in the public, right? So powerful, in fact, that we see a period when governments are trying to thwart it. But literacy is a tool for liberation, one of the most powerful tools for social change and justice that we have. After the Civil War, an amazing thing happens in the South. And let's go to the next slide. As we tried to rebuild and repair the country, public schools cropped up. What is essential to know, but is often left out of this conversation, the creation of these public schools in the South, in particular, was propelled by the recently freed African Americans who understood publicly supported schools and literacy as not only a pathway to individual uplift and equality, but a cornerstone of the promise of American democracy. And so the image that is appearing on this slide was printed in papers in 1883, and it documents educational progress across the Commonwealth. In the top left corner is a rendering of the all-Black Navy Hills School in Richmond. Due to efforts among the Black community to create a publicly supported school system, from the end of the Civil War in 1870 to 1910, literacy rates rose among African Americans from 20% to 70%. Now, of course, we know this period of kind of hopeful growth known as Reconstruction was short-lived, and an era of segregation and deep inequality would soon take hold. But as we see on the next slide, just one more affirmation, one before that one. Yeah, that's the one. Just one more affirmation of literacy as a public good, right? Of literacy as a tool for liberation. Even in segregation and during massive resistance, when white communities and parents decided that they would rather close their public schools than integrate, the historical record is clear. Black families banded together, pooled limited resources, built schools, and hired teachers so that their children could learn to read. Now, of course, this was for their individual benefit as humans, right? Dream, imagine, understand, but not just that, right? As one leading Black thinker after another explained during this time period and beyond, literacy was also for communities and for the ideal of American democracy. All right, let's move to the next slide now. So during the second half of the 20th century, as more and more American kids are making their way to public schools, we see illiteracy rates drop even further. But literacy, what kids read, how they should learn, and why they're reading in the first place, remains no less contentious. Should they read so that they learn to embrace norms as they are, or should they learn to read so that they can challenge those norms? Should kids immerse themselves in literature to see various versions of themselves and better understand what the world could be? Or should they read books that tell them how it must be? So in these two very famous examples, we see Dr. Seuss's Yertle the Turtle and a page from a Dick and Jane reader. You can get a sense of how these debates played out in classrooms, in homes, and most importantly, right in kids' hands. So on one side, we're questioning existing power arrangements, right? But on the other, we're embracing them. So literacy is powerful, man, right? So it's all of this, these snippets, and much, much more that takes us to where we are right now. And so in this next slide, we see an overview of the Virginia Literacy Act, which is the embodiment of a historical understanding of the individual and public power of literacy. School closures associated with the pandemic have animated a new wave of fears over illiteracy, and the recent NAEP scores that I mentioned only serve as confirmation. The Virginia Literacy Act is one really great example of how states are responding to this and the importance they're placing on literacy. Now, this act, which I know that our wonderful panel is going to discuss in much more detail, promises to bring expert, evidence-based instruction to kids across the state. More attention in terms of resources and airtime to literacy can't be a bad thing. But if I were to offer a word of caution, it would be this. And let's move to our final slide. Nothing that happens in the schools is isolated just to the classroom. So a focus on literacy instruction and teacher preparation is important, but also not enough. Across the state and around the nation, kids make their way to deeply unequal public schools, thanks to zoning laws and public school financing practices. Teacher shortages mean that more and more students are learning from substitute teachers, regardless of policy mandates. And the politicization of schooling means that many teachers report being unsure of what they can teach or being afraid. All of this has dire effects on literacy instruction. I want to close with 2 points before we open it up to conversation with all of you. The first is this. Ensuring equitable literacy instruction means ensuring that the public schools kids learn in are equitable. The second is that the polarization we see right now surrounding public schools and literacy comes at a cost that should make us very worried. Should we even have public schools? Maybe charters or choice is the way to go. How should we teach kids to read? Will we die on the balanced literacy hill or the science of reading hill? What should kids be allowed to read? Are we trying to broaden or constrict how they understand the world and the people around them? But that polarization, how to teach, what to read, whether to have public schools at all, and how to fund them, these draw us to the margins. The result is a polarization that not only hurts kids and pulls teachers away from the schools, but tears at the very fabric of American democracy. And so my call is, as we think about literacy, I want us to think about how we can come together and do that and find that common good. That is where I will wrap it up for this evening, and I'm looking forward to chatting with all of you.
Wow, Diana. So amazing. Thank you. I feel like we've been able to get a glimpse into your body of work. You took us on a history journey, right? And understanding literacy in ways that I haven't thought about in a while. So thank you so much for that. I have so many ahas and things that are kind of bouncing around in my head. A lot that you said, just the power of literacy. But I'll start with this question because you mentioned also literacy is liberation, and that really stood out to me as well. Um, Talk a bit more about how the ability to read and write empowers individuals and communities to break free from cycles of inequality and injustice, which I also heard as a theme throughout your sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is the core of it, that, it starts at an individual level, right? When we're reading, we're dreaming, we're learning, we're communicating, we're imagining. But then we also, there's another step, right? We begin to collaborate and communicate with others. We're learning about what could be. We're learning about not just what is, but what are pathways for disruption. And so we've seen this happen time and again where communities come together, right? This is exactly why Nate Turner's rebellion was considered so terrifying, right? Because he had the ability to read, and with that came the spread of ideas and communication. So it's a powerful thing. It's a very powerful thing.
It really is, as you mentioned, the power that it can be for individuals and community. I'm thinking about the poll response earlier, where most people said the responsibility is on parents and community. But then I'm also juxtaposing that with some of the historical context of literacy and the forbidden nature of literacy for some communities as well. And so it's really, it's a lot to grapple with, right? When you think about where we are now, juxtaposed with where we were not too many years ago.
Yeah.
You also kind of mentioned just literacy, just as a basic human right, right? Um, Discuss the significance of really viewing it as such, I mean, just the consequences of denying those rights to certain populations or individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, literacy is part of our essential humanity, right? Right.
Mhm.
Literacy is thinking, communicating. And so I think what's really important to see is that when we deprive literacy, and I think that we need to see things around us, like poverty and inequitable schools, those are also ways that we deprive literacy, right? Where we encourage illiteracy. Why are we doing that? Why are we not fostering that, right? And so there are questions to be asked. I don't have all the answers to, but about how are we valuing everybody's essential humanity? Or are there reasons why in this society we are okay with some voices being silenced and pushed to the margins? And I think for the health of our democracy, that's something we have to actively fight against.
Mhm. Thank you. And I know you said that you don't have all the answers, but you have some really great questions and have given us a lot to ponder. And so, folks who are here with us, I hope that as you're pondering some things that Diana said, feel free to drop them in the chat. I know you'll be staying on with us, and so, possibly if any other questions come up later. But again, thank you so much for kicking us off in such a grounded way this evening and for sharing your body of work with us.
Yeah.
Panelists, I'm coming to you now. And as I'm sure you all are also buzzing with to respond to even what some of Diana shared, I'll be sharing out some of the bios of our panelists. And if you all can just come off of camera and come on camera as I share your bio. All right. So first, Ryan Corrigan with the Reed Center. Ryan serves as the executive director of the Reed Center, focusing on changing lives through adult literacy. He's been fundraising for 28 years and has served as executive director and director of development and marketing for several organizations, in addition to writing strategic plans for over 5 organizations and sitting on multiple boards. Welcome, Ryan.
Thanks for having me, Adrienne.
Absolutely. Next, we have Krista Donahoe, Read to Them. Krista is the executive director of Read to Them, a national nonprofit that creates school-wide reading programs to support reading together at home and learning together at school by providing schools with the necessary tools, resources, and guidance to create a culture of literacy in their community. She believes that reading out loud to children can change their futures. Thank you for joining us, Krista.
Thank you, Adrienne.
Absolutely. Next, we have Calvin Duncan, community leader. Calvin was birthed into adversity due to his mother's untimely death and no real knowledge of his father. Calvin was reared by his aunt. At the age of 17, his aunt passed away, leaving him homeless and to fend for himself. Basketball was Calvin's vehicle out of the urban community. His athletic outlet led him first to Oak Hill Academy, where he graduated in 1981. He later attended Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. While there on scholarship, Duncan earned a degree in criminal justice. He is a 3-time Hall of Famer, NBA draft pick, and VCU basketball legend, who today is a life coach, basketball coach, motivational speaker, teacher, author, and the pastor of Faith and Family Church. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Duncan.
I'm so glad to be on with these wonderful people, and you're doing a fabulous job. This is going to be
Thank
amazing.
you. Thank you
Yeah.
for that. Awesome. And last but not least, we've got Dr. Christopher Jones with VASCD. And in addition to serving VASCD as the executive director, Dr. Jones is the chair for the Virginia Public Education Coalition, vice chair for Regional Education Laboratory Appalachia, founding partner for the Commonwealth Learning Partnership, and representative for the Commonwealth Alliance for Thriving Youth. He has a breadth of experience in education as a principal, assistant principal, teacher, leader, high school math teacher, and has served as chair for several education leadership committees. Chris, thank you for joining us as well.
Thank you, Adrienne. It is great to be here, having a great time so far.
Absolutely. I can imagine it was really hard for you all to be off camera and off mute, as Diana was sharing. So I'm going to open us up with a really general question. Any thoughts, reflections, ponderings as you all also experience Diana's presentation? And anyone can jump in here to share any reflections that they might have.
Yes, I would love to start off. This is Calvin Duncan. Diana was amazing. And she reminded me, and I'll go into my story later, of a teacher I had when I was in the 4th grade in Jersey, Linden, New Jersey, at school number 4 by the name of Miss Sumcopolis. And I did not like Miss Sumcopolis because she was a disciplinarian, she was strict, and she made us do work. And that's a whole nother story. But I just really enjoyed the wealth of information that Diana had, and she shared it with enthusiasm.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing.
I particularly appreciated, I think about literacy as a gateway to so many different things. In addition to being a gateway, it can also be a gatekeeper, and not just whether or not you are a person who is literate, but how we not just control the access to the information, but also have throughout history influenced thinking and influenced decision making, et cetera. So what I appreciated was the balance and really seeing throughout history how literacy has been used as a gateway and a gatekeeper.
Awesome. And Chris, perfect timing, because I love to just kick us off with you as you shared a bit of that, right? But just giving your extensive background in education leadership and advocacy, share a bit more about your perspective on the critical role that literacy plays in the success of students and communities.
Thank you, Adrienne. I want to take just a brief moment to thank you for your leadership, particularly in moderating tonight's conversation. And I'd like to express my gratitude for being invited to participate in this session of the RVA Engage series. I'm honored to represent VASCD in this important conversation. To me, literacy is reading, writing, speaking, and listening in the dominant syntax. As complicated as we've unfortunately made literacy, to me, that is really what it hones into, and it's essentially communication. There has been an expansion into numerical literacy, data literacy, media literacy, relational literacy, and we have recently put a strong emphasis on reading. I believe that literacy can strengthen an individual's experience, which leads to a stronger contribution to their communities.
Awesome. Yeah. I love your definition too. So thank you for sharing that. I think even when you look at your background, I mean, the Commonwealth Alliance for Thriving Youth, chair of Virginia Public Education Coalition, I mean, you really have been involved in so many initiatives that are related to education and youth development. Talk about how literacy and what you've seen through these initiatives, just literacy being a foundational skill, even for addressing any broader challenges that youth may have throughout their education system and for their well-being in general.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think just as I was just talking about, my reaction to Diana's presentation, literacy really is, it's a gateway. Success in academics, something as simple as test taking. We know that the students throughout their educational careers have to take tests over and over and over again, and their ability simply to read will sometimes be whether or not they're successful on that test. Sometimes we measure reading just as much as we're measuring the math on the math test or the science on the science test. Something like reading a menu or applying for a job, or when it comes time for that college application, the list goes on. But because literacy is an ability to effectively communicate, particularly with reading, especially on grade level, it also has an impact on a child's sense of self-efficacy, which has an early influence on their mental health and ultimately their overall development as a whole human being, not just a child who wears different hats in their different settings. In school, we think of kids as students. At home, they're children. In the out of school time setting, they're, depending on where they are, is a different hat, but they really are a whole human being. But that the early success in literacy feeds into that development. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And really, as you shared the example of say you're taking a math test, but if you can't read the questions on the test, right? I mean, every moment, every moment literacy, and even in your perspective of the reading and the writing and the listening, the full suite of communication. I mean, we do it day in and day out. So really appreciate that perspective and you sharing that. A bit more about your story that was interesting. You were in the service, United States Army Airborne Ranger, I believe, right?
That's right.
Um, I'm
And not to interrupt you, but this year marks 20 years that I've been separated from the military. So I served for 6 years, but I've been out for 20. It's hard to believe. Wow, does time fly?
Wow. Well, I'm curious, being in the military and being connected to so many different folks from different backgrounds, how did your military experience influence your views on literacy and education?
But in the military, everything is centered on communication, following orders, giving directions, reading and understanding field manuals, implementing SOPs, standard operating procedures. I've seen firsthand the success an individual and even a unit can have based on literacy levels. Because I think about literacy as reading, writing, listening, and speaking in the dominant syntax. The impact that it can have when there are higher levels, but then also the detriment when there are lower levels of literacy. Even though the stakes are a bit different in the military, the impact is parallel. And as far as the advocacy piece for individuals and communities, literacy leads to a deeper understanding of roles and responsibilities, especially from a civic engagement perspective, and really being able to identify who decides, what is decided, and those decisions, and the impact that those decisions have on the individual and community. Literacy plays such a huge role in all of that.
Hmm. Hmm. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And Krista, I'm thinking about you and some of your work and would love to kind of bring you into the conversation a bit more as I'm thinking about read to them and some of the focus that you all do of just like the importance of reading together at home. Before we get to jobs and even before we get into schools, and Chris is just talking about his experience in military and beyond. How does your organization work to empower parents and caregivers to become active partners in their children's reading journeys, especially for those who may face literacy challenges themselves?
Thank you, Adrienne. Well, I will just echo what Chris said. I am just honored to be on this screen with such bright people, and it was such an inspiring conversation so far. So thank you for hosting this, and thank you to RVA Engage for having us all here. It's been a really fun night already. But to talk about how my organization, Read to Them, helps to engage families in students' literacy. Read to Them's been around for over 20 years. And what we do is partner with schools. Our primary focus is family engagement with students' literacy. And it is something that every school across the country is dying to know how to do. We want to get our parents engaged in the schools, in their children's journey of learning. And what we found is that when schools are able to present really clear, meaningful, and accessible ways for parents to engage, they choose to do it. They want to do it. And when that happens, our communities thrive. And I think sometimes the struggle is finding those clear, meaningful, accessible ways to allow parents to do that. So the programming that Read to Them creates really partners with schools and creates reading programs that are fun, that people want to be involved in. We get an entire community reading the same book together. And I'm also a huge advocate of choice, for children having choice in what they read. But the program, one of our flagship programs, One School, One Book, really brings an entire community together so that everyone from the students to the principal to the cafeteria workers and the bus drivers are reading the same title together at the same time. And when that's happening, there's a whole lot to talk about, right? And it's kind of a positive peer pressure environment. And we create structures so that the parents know how they can get involved. We have reading schedules that will allow families to take small chunks. We're going to read together for 15 minutes each night during this program. And we're going to do it with text that's accessible to our families. And then we'll have 1 or 2 discussion questions that can spark a conversation, because part of the benefit is that social emotional bonding that's happening when a caregiver is reading out loud to a child.
Mm-hmm. Krista, thank you. And I love how even quickly you share some of those kind of tangible strategies that folks can do that we're doing with youth. Hold that thought. I've got more questions for you, but Ryan, I want to bring you into the conversation a bit, right? As I hear Krista kind of talk about the work with youth, I'm thinking about the work that you do with the Read Center that really is frontline for adult literacy support. Any similarities there about approaches or strategies, and just any initial sharings, even as we talk about parents at home and how it can be a challenge if parents in the home have some literacy struggles? Share a little bit about the Read Center and what your experience has been.
Sure. Thank you, Adrienne. And I first want to echo what both Chris and Krista and Calvin have already said. This is an incredible opportunity for all of us. We're all passionate about literacy. I personally feel like Jack Black at the Academy Awards. I'm not sure why I'm on this dais, but this is amazing. So thank you for the Read Center. We definitely have not much of a different approach for how we teach. We are phonics based primarily for our adults, but it is exciting to be, and I've been in the same room with Krista several times. Not that you other guys aren't exciting, by the way, but to have conversations about what the kids are doing and how to bring parents into it. What we focus on, of course, is making sure that the parents also have an opportunity in that reading journey. I've got stories here of one of my older, I'll say more seasoned students is 83 years old, and he came specifically to learn to read to his great-grandchildren. So those opportunities are incredible to us. Being not only in the same room, but in these discussions with groups like Read to Them, and saying, what is, and of course it's the National Adult Education and Family Literacy Week. What does family literacy mean to those families who, of course, do have intergenerational issues, some challenges with mom and dad who maybe don't have the sense of confidence in reading to their children, but desperately want that connection. So that is where our focus lies.
I love that, and really appreciate it has to be intergenerational, right? I mean, when I think about even in some of the stories that you all have shared, you think about, we're talking about parents, we're talking about youth. I think about my mother, who I hope is out here in the audience, but she's an educator. But I know on the other end, my grandmother, I think she may have finished 5th grade. She was young. She took care of her family in South Carolina. But I know still with that background, it was really important to her that her children had a really strong educational foundation, right? And so I say that to say, Ryan, you make me think about some of the intergenerational and holistic approaches that we have to have for literacy. So thank you for sharing there. Krista, you really highlight reading aloud to children and how reading aloud to children can change their future. Could you just elaborate on that a little bit more, long-term benefits of this practice, and just how you believe it contributes to improved literacy outcomes and just overall educational success?
Yes, absolutely. So a lot of the conversation that we've been having tonight, I think it's so important to understand, sort of the federal mandates and the Virginia Literacy Act and how that's, impacting our schools and our families. But I think it's also important to recognize that literacy doesn't flow down from federal mandates through state assessments and district policy and then into classrooms and then into kids' brains. That's not how literacy works. Those things are important, right? But it's the things that feel so simple, reading out loud to your child or to a child, that make such a difference and such a long-term impact. I think, if you're on this call, you're probably aware of all of the research behind the importance of that 0 to 2 in brain development. So the spoken word is so important in firing those neural connections, and having that back and forth development between a caregiver and a child at those early stages is so critical. It's having long-term impacts on critical thinking and creativity, on brain development, on phonetic awareness, and the expansion of a child's vocabulary. And all of that stuff has to happen. Those are the foundational pieces before literacy, before reading and writing can even begin. So just reading out loud to children in your life can have such a profound impact.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Calvin, I'd like to bring you into the conversation now as we're talking about intergenerational approaches. A lot of what Krista has shared, right? We're talking about parents and guardians and grandparents leaning in and reading out loud, but you really shared from just lived experience the adversities that you faced early on. And while there were adults there, you lost a lot of lives with your parents and your aunt also. If you don't mind sharing, what was your experience like as a youth as you think about your literacy journey?
Well, first of all, once again, thank everybody that's on this panel. And I want to thank Greg and Gail for giving me this opportunity. My experience started in Linden, New Jersey, inner city, North Jersey, just a kid who loved to have fun and play. School, I wasn't that bad until I got into 4th grade. And when I got into 4th grade, I rebelled. There was a teacher by the name of Miss Simcopolis. She was a great teacher, but we just didn't hit it off. And at that point in time, I just stopped reading. I just stopped reading. The only thing I want to do is have fun. I was able to kind of scoot by and get by. And before you know it, and I don't know how much time I have, so I'm gonna make it as fast. I'm gonna give little bullet points. You can ask questions later. Before you know it, I was the type of kid who was in school, and every time it was my time to read, my turn to read, I'll say, I don't want to read. And I'll get attitude. So the teacher just passed me. Then she'll ask me again next day, I don't want to read. Then it got to the point where she just stopped asking me. And as a result, I'm thinking I'm getting over. I'm thinking it's easy, but I was only hurting myself. My aunt who raised me only had a 6th grade education. Her concern was more so stay out of the streets, stay out of trouble with the law, and you're going to be all right. So when I would come home with F's and D's, she just thought I was doing the best I could do. However, I was so much capable of doing so much more, but nobody really tapped on the inside of the well of the treasures that I have to say, hey, you're smart. You could do this work. And so I just kind of breezed along to the point where I end up in the 11th grade and took a placement test to go to the school called Oak Hill Academy to transfer out of New Jersey because I was doing well in basketball. My social life was kind of shaky and my academics was just messed up, and discovered I had a 4th grade reading level. And Mr. and Mrs. Eisner, a white couple from, West Virginia and North Carolina, saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And the beautiful part was this. They said to me, Calvin, when we look at your records, look at my transcript, we see that you missed 61 days of school. And we're trying to figure out how in the world you got to 11th grade. But we believe you have the aptitude. I'll never forget the word they used. You have the aptitude to do work and be successful if you are willing to do it. And ladies and gentlemen, at that time, that my aunt just had a stroke. And so I remember looking at both of them and I said, I have to do it because I have nowhere to go. And that's when I was really faced with adversity, but did not allow adversity to have the best of me. And as a result, I just worked hard. They made me read Sports Illustrated because the thing about it was they educated me on the importance of reading. Then they engaged me in something that I like. And then they encouraged me on reading and continue to keep up with it. So they had me read Sports Illustrated. I started reading a thesaurus. And before you know it, I had to pass my SATs. I was fortunate enough to pass my SATs. And I was recruited by Minnesota, Purdue, Villanova, but I decided to come to VCU, and the rest is history. I've been very fortunate. So I'll just stop right there. But my back was against the wall, but I didn't give up.
Yeah, I think what did it, Hall of Famer, NBA draft. There were so many accolades in that bio. But Mr. Duncan, thank you for sharing your journey, your very personal journey with us. And the couple that you mentioned, right,
Yes.
is really the embodiment when we talk about it being a community approach, right? And I think you said it in your words, they saw something in you, and
Yes.
you are also ready and willing to share. When we come back to you, I want to hear more about that journey, but you made me think about what Krista shared and the importance of choice, right? And so you said you would read, and it was Sports Illustrated, but that's a viable magazine, right? And so when you think about reading something that's of interest to you, that piques your interest, it makes you want to do it a bit more. So
yeah,
appreciate you not even realizing, how you kind of interwove that into the story. Krista, thinking about your work with Read to Them, are there any specific examples of just successful programs that I know you talked about family engagement, but just any successful programs that have effectively engaged parents and just caregivers in supporting literacy at home?
Yeah, I would say that there are a couple of different programs that we do. I mentioned the One School, One Book program, where we really do get the entire school community. We encourage everyone to be reading together. And there are lots of communities. So we do that in all 50 states, all across the country. Schools are doing that program. And lots of schools will sort of go the extra mile on that, and they'll get their community involved in supporting that too. So, we've had districts where the local pizza place has made a special pizza that's in line with the book that the entire district is reading, and you can go in and get a special discount on that pizza. Or where the children's theater is putting on a production that's in line with the same text that the community is reading. And those experiences are so special because that really is surrounding that child with literacy from all angles. At home with their parents and caregivers, while they're at school, they're celebrating and discussing the story. And then they go out into the community and they can see that this is everywhere. This is surrounding them. It's important, and other people think it's important. So I would say that's a really good example. The other one I would mention is typically we've worked with grade level students, but just recently here in the city of Richmond, we've become the local affiliate for Imagination Library. And that's a program that gets free books into the hands of young children, ages 0 to 5. And that's been an incredible experience that we just really kicked off this summer. And we've seen just tremendous support for within the community. So we're so excited to watch that grow.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing those. And I love that the strategies that you shared sound fun and engaging, right? Literacy should be a fun thing. And so I love the strategies that you shared. Ryan, want to go to you, as we've just been hearing a little bit about personal stories, and you've got an interesting journey, having the passion for fundraising and nonprofit leadership, and now serving as ED for the Read Center, which is really front and center for this work. How has literacy become a key focus for you?
Thank you for the question. Passion for fundraising is a tough one to swallow. It's typically you're passionate about keeping the lights on.
That's right.
But passionate for the cause, absolutely. So, I've got a 28-year journey in in nonprofit work, and both my parents were kind of centered in adult education as adults later in life. So my father actually went back to school post his military career to get multiple degrees and eventually become head of a small satellite college. My mother did the same thing, again, as an adult. So I grew up in that environment, mostly, again, around military here on Fort Lee, and seeing, the spectrum of education and desires for betterment. Um, for me, starting out as executive director with Children's Miracle Network, supporting Children's Hospital and VCU, Children's Medical Center at the time, I recall vividly seeing or sitting with a family who had been given essentially a sheet of paper with a diagnosis that they could not read. And I remember seeing a powerlessness and a helplessness that I've carried for this 28-year journey. So being asked to become executive director of the Reed Center sometime later was a very nice full circle and an opportunity to support this effort.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I want to do a quick acknowledgement to our attendees. Thank you all for so many who have started to submit some questions. We'll start Q&A in about 10 minutes. But again, thank you all. Just want to acknowledge, we know that they're coming in. Keep them coming. And we should have a pretty decent amount of time to get to some of those questions. Ryan, I'll start off with you, I'll say, with this question about the Virginia Literacy Act. But, to all panelists, I encourage you all to share your perspectives, as this has really been the buzz for Virginia around literacy. But so Ryan, we know that the act has garnered just a lot of attention for its efforts to improve literacy rates in the state. Can you provide any insights into the goals and just impact from your perspective, and just how you believe the Reed Center is contributing to its success?
Yeah, thank you. So I think what the Virginia Literacy Act does, of course, is highlight the issue, which is super important. It's got and Diana did a tremendous job, so I'll try not to do a disservice to it. But it does discuss the science of reading, again, phonics-based education, but with a primary goal of students to be able to read by the end of third grade. Incredibly important. The heavier focus being on K through 3, but an overall focus on K through 8. So providing teachers training and support, providing what the state is calling the right resources. But one of the tenets of the Virginia Literacy Act is engagement of families and active parent participation. So one of the things that it's going to be focused on is digital literacy and opportunity and equity, again, for those, making sure that parents have all of the resources necessary to allow for this. Everything from, internet connection in the home, the right, laptops, accessibility, etc. But I will go back to, if you are going to have a tenant that speaks to engaging families, then we can probably make the Virginia Literacy Act stronger. Because there's currently no mention of adult literacy in that. So from my perspective, I think it's got an opportunity to be a little bit more robust. Sorry for using the word robust, but that's what I'm after.
That's perfect. Curious panelists, do you all have any additional thoughts or things that you'd like to add to what Ryan has shared, which was pretty spot on, and what Diana shared as well? Any additional comments?
You're awesome. You're awesome. Keep it up, buddy. You're awesome.
Well, thank you all. I think what we'll do next, I know each of you all were asked to just ponder action steps, takeaways, what you would say to the audience let's wrap up this group conversation and discussion there before we go to Q&A. And so I'll just kind of I'll start with you, Chris, and then we can just go around. What action steps or, what takeaways would you provide for the folks who are here in the room?
Yeah, I think that's always that important question, right? Let's talk about it, and then let's be about it. I think what's important for all of us in whatever role that we serve children in is to find ways in which we can enhance language development for the kids, whether that's reading to them, reading with them, even reading the same books and then having conversations about it. That exposure to the language through talking is extremely important. I think about just my own experiences as an educator and as a teacher. I was a math teacher, talking the students through things, just that vocabulary development and the dominant syntax being the math language was so important for them to hear the words over and over and to see those words in context. And then I think about my role as a parent. When my children were younger, reading to them constantly, just reading through them and reading to them and talking through. But there are times in my role as a parent where I'm very introverted. I don't talk very much. And the less that I was talking, the more language development my kids were picking up. And so it was a conscious decision for me as a parent. Like, I know right now that I want to be quiet. I don't want to say anything. I just kind of want to retreat to self. But it was important for my kids to just talk through some things and not just being overly talkative, but just really exposing them to vocabulary and that language development, because it will ultimately, of course, help in that reading development and then kind of accelerating reading comprehension, which leads to other things, but also the whole side of the well-rounded individual, just exposure to different experiences, especially through sharing that language.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Others?
I would echo what both Ryan and Chris have said. I think that the Virginia Literacy Act is a fantastic beginning. I think there are ways that it can and should grow and change and develop over time. But I think that the best thing that we can all do, everyone who's on this call and cares about literacy, is to stay informed about it and to stay in communication with our legislators to make sure that as it grows and changes, we're focusing on the right things, number one, and number two, that there's fiscal support behind implementing it, because it's real hard to do if it's just words on paper and no line item in the budget, right? So I think everyone on this call, I would encourage everyone to do that. And then the second thing is, we've talked a lot about supporting children and supporting even adult learners who are learning to read. But the other thing I think we all need to be doing is supporting those parents and caregivers as they're reading aloud to their children, right? Everyone wants their child to succeed, but we're all seeking validation that we're doing it right, and we're all doubting whether we are, right? So we need to support those parents and those caregivers to help them understand that just talking to your child is really important.
That's right. That's right.
And then one resource, if I can, I really love Reading for Our Lives, the book by Maya Smart. She's a Virginia native and has done a phenomenal job of sort of laying out the plan for those parents and caregivers who are looking for that validation of, how do I do this and how do I know I'm doing it right? So it's a really great resource.
Okay. Thank you for sharing, Krista. And I wrote that down. I'll have to check that out. Calvin and Ryan, any action steps that you all would like to share?
I'll go last, Ryan. You go for it, buddy.
He's holding out for last place.
Thank you for yielding the floor, Calvin. Yeah, so I think that there are big advocacy opportunities, as Krista stated, that I implore people to pay attention to the issue. But there's also some hands-on opportunities for people to do. We've got over 120 volunteers here at the Read Center that come in and do one-on-one reading with our students. So investigate, see what's in the community, because some great things are happening for individuals, and together I think we can make it a much more inclusive thing. What Diana again shared, viewing this as a social justice issue is so important. We just cannot negate that fact at all. So keep your eyes open.
Thank you, Ryan.
Well, I want to come with this angle. All of you guys that are educating and helping young people learn, I want you to recognize that there is a Calvin Duncan in your village, and it takes a whole village to raise a child. I want y'all to continue to do what you're doing and do not grow weary in well-doing, because sometimes I know that, as an educator myself, you have all these people and you're trying to get the message across and somebody, nobody's listening. But I want you to always remember, as you can encourage the young people and people, I heard somebody start learning at 81, learn to read at 81. That's amazing, but encourage them that right now they may not be the best, but they can do their best. And for me, that's where it all happened. And so I always like to say good, better, best, never let it rest until your good is better and your better is best. And to encourage them, start where you are, use what you have, and just do what you can. And I believe that that is very important to encourage these young people. And also just remember that to encourage them that a book can take you on a journey somewhere else that right now maybe your finances can't get you. A book can take you to Paris. A book can take you to Africa. A book can take you to Hollywood. A book can take you to New Jersey. A book can take you anywhere. And what it does, it opens up your imagination. And when you begin to have a vision, without a vision, people perish. These young people need a vision, because what is a vision? A vision is simply a preview of your future. So we got to continue to give them vision. And I'll stop with this. I'm the first in my family to earn a degree in criminal justice and got a minor in psychology. And the fact that I have 3 children, my son Richard graduated from Virginia Tech, my daughter Azelle graduated from Liberty, and my other daughter Chelsea graduated from UVA, got a master's from UVA, and taught at UVA. I'm gonna tell you what, right now, I am so proud of my seed, and I want you to I'll say this: literacy gives what? Liberation, but also literacy leaves a legacy. And that's what this thing is all about. So I'm just so honored to be a part of such a wonderful, high esteemed group like you guys. And who would ever thought a young man who had a 4th grade reading level in 11th grade would now work part-time for Governor Youngkin as an advisor of community outreach and so many other things. So I am blessed and I'm thankful to be a part of this team.
Thank you. You have wrapped us up perfectly for our discussion. I wish I could have had you to close this out. It's hard to follow you, Mr. Duncan.
Oh, no, you're good.
Perfect timing for us to go to our Q&A. Audience, thank you all so much for being so engaging. And we've got some really good questions that I believe we can get through before we wrap up at 7:30. The first one that I'll pose to the panelists: what advice would you all give to people who work with youth in a community setting, so art classes, sports, scouts, etc., where the engagement is about something other than reading, but where each participant's ability to read and communicate affects their experience? And I'll read it again. And it sounds like, what advice would you give to someone? They work with young people. It's not a reading program, right? But they have to read to participate. We kind of mentioned this earlier. What advice would you give to them if these children may seem to be struggling a bit to really engage with reading?
I'll give it a shot, Adrienne. And I think that question came from Liz. And I put my initial response, and the more I think about it, the more it stands true. I think is really just that exposure to language. So while teaching students about art and creativity that goes on in the brain and the outlet of the art, whether that's visual arts or through music, theater, dance, is really talking through and exposing to language. If the dominant syntax is dance, then we use dance vocabulary and we say those words over and over and have that exposure in the conversation and the words and the vocabulary in context. I think that is a strong way to help develop that literacy, which is ultimately a part of reading, so that when the child is reading, the exposure to the sound of the words, the words in context and the meaning of the words, that fluency will be able to develop a little bit more simply because they had exposure to that language in the unique setting that you get to spend with them.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Chris, for sharing here and sharing in the chat. I love to just add to leaning into your relationship, right? I think it's a special gift to be able to connect with young people outside of the home and even outside of school. And so, as you're picking up on those things, really leaning into your relationship and as best as you can, connecting them to a resource, right? If you feel as though there's a bit of a struggle there, I would think about some of the strategies that Krista even shared earlier. How can you start to doing some reading out loud, asking them how they feel, just being really intentional once you notice the thing, but really great question and sharing there. Next question. How closely do national samples mirror the poll responses of our audience tonight, particularly at a rate of more than 2-to-1, that the primary responsibility for youth literacy lies with parents and not schools? The question behind the question is really about how society conflates early child education with early child care. Any thoughts on that? A great question.
I have thoughts, but I'm talking too much, so I defer to my fellow panelists.
There's no
You're
such
doing
thing as
great.
talking too much on the panel.
You are doing great, Chris. If it will make you feel better, I'll throw a little something out, but then you have to also give yours. I can't speak to how what the mirroring relationship is between what our poll said and what national statistics might say. I would imagine that they're probably reasonably close, but I think that we have to. So we have to support the parents, right? It is a community endeavor, but I think we have to support the parents. And I think that when we're talking about literacy, we often think about school age kids, right? Because that's where we start measuring things. But it happens so far before that. And we have to be able to support our parents. And what if this conversation goes actually back to paid parental leave when children are born? Like, I think it goes all the way back there. So that those parents can have those interactions at those early stages. There, Chris, are you feeling better now? Are you?
Well, so here's what's awesome, Krista, is I didn't even have to come off of mute because I was thinking the same thing. I think, and I don't have any data to back up, a national comparison to our poll. But when I make connections to just my role as a professional, but then also my personal role, so much of a child's development is so critical in the early stages before a kid is even introduced to even the pre-K setting, even the 3-year-old programs and the 4-year-old programs. And Chris, I think you mentioned it, that 0 to 2 age frame is so critical. And the person who's most responsible for that development is the parent, which is why I believe, this is just my own personal thought and experience, why our poll reflected such a huge responsibility on the parent, because we set them up for success at such an early stage before anybody else has access to influence them.
That's right. Ryan, did you have something that you wanted to share?
Did I look like that?
You did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's just an interesting idea that this is where we're at. Again, historically, I think, to my own education, looking back, that I've certainly heard people say, well, that's not my job, that's the school's job.
Mm-hmm.
So it is interesting that we do have such a strong focus on early childhood foundation education, which is super great. Having a 5-year-old of my own, but also seeing those reflections change over time. I've got a 20, an 18, a 16, and a 5-year-old. Do the math on that one, and to see the changes in the education system, but also that idea that, hey, this isn't, you don't ship them off to school and that's where they're learning. It does start here.
Mm-hmm.
And like Chris said, like Krista said, 0 through, right? Like that's where the foundations are laid.
That's right. That's right. I think we'll try to squeeze in one more question. And Diana, if you're still in the room and if you're still engaged, we'd love to see you come off of, there she is. While I pull up the question for Diana, I want to remind the audience, there's a survey poll in the chat. If you all don't mind filling that out for our partners who put on the conversation, it would really be helpful. So really want to draw attention there. But Diana, we did have a few questions for you, but I think there's one I'd love to ask you before we close out. So do you think that we are at a unique point in literacy history, or have there been struggles from the past that would speak to our current polarization? And can you help us in how we think in looking forward? And I'll read it again if that's helpful. Just overall, what's your unique? Do you believe we're at a unique point in literacy history, or have there been struggles from the past that would speak to our current polarizations? And then, how can you help us look forward?
Yeah, yeah, no, I love that question. I mean, and the answer is always both, right? Like, as the historian, we always see these echoes of the past. We say, like, oh, this reminds me a lot of those book bans or of these other moments. But then there is something so unique about where we are now. So, of course, it's both, right? So, the comforting thing is that we're not just flailing, right? We can look back at how this has played out. We can look back and understand what book bans have been motivated by. We can look back and understand the real critical importance of strong connections between homes, communities, and schools, working in partnership, and when that really leads to good things. And I think we can use all of that to chart a new course, right? And so I think my biggest hope for us as we move forward is, what could a strong advocacy for public schools and families look like that doesn't have us on like the high school debate team, right? Like, well, I'm here and you're there, so we've got to hold on to our points more than we've got to find common ground, right? And because I do think that for most Americans, we really share a lot of common ground here with what we hope for our kids, with what we hope for our schools, our communities, and our families. And I think if we can kind of step ourselves out of the politicized discourse, we really can find a lot of productive ways to move ourselves forward.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Diana, thank you for that response. Calvin, Ryan, Krista, and Chris, thank you all so much for participating in the panel. You all have truly given us a lot to think about and how we forge ahead. I would say for our audience, we are actually going to close out with a poll, and you won't be too surprised by what the poll questions are. And so as we are queuing that up on the screen, it's the same question that we started with. Whose responsibility is literacy? We wanted to bring that back to our attention, curious if hearts have been changed or minds have been changed based on the conversation. And then there's a second question that really brings it full circle. Why does literacy matter, right? The theme of the night. We'd love to hear from you all on that, and we'll give a minute just to let folks respond. Oh, sorry. There's a third question. I didn't scroll down and read. Here it is. What action are you most compelled to pursue? Would love for you to share that. And then we'll do a bit of an overview slide too, with some of the things that were shared earlier, but would really love to hear from you all about just what action you are compelled to pursue. All right. And the results are in. Same. Parents is increased. Okay. Parents at 46%, community at 38%, schools at 12%. And so it sounds like folks were affirmed through the conversation, and even a deeper increase in understanding the importance of parents, as the first educators and teachers for our young people. So thank you all for sharing that. Same response for why does literacy matter? Improving the lives by increasing capabilities. I love that this conversation really brought to light those different journeys and what that might look like. But that was a resounding 73%. And then last but not least, really love to hear you all's action steps that you'll commit to through your civic engagement. Volunteering with an organization addressing literacy. There are so many on the call, so I'm hopeful that you all have grabbed those links in the chat as you're looking at organizations to begin connecting with. Contacting legislators or other advocacy groups, 23%. Sharing what I learned with others in my circle at 15%. Donating to literacy-focused nonprofits, and then just continuing to learn. All great responses, I believe, all great approaches when we're looking at how we can just deepen our connection and even reimagining what it looks like. And so in closing, just a huge thank you to each of you, our panelists, our attendees, the folks who were in the background, making sure that we had a smooth experience. I would love to invite you all to the next conversation. The focus will be on the arts, why it matters, and what you can do. It'll be held October 18th, and the invitation will be coming soon. Thank you all so much for just really spending time as we reimagine what our commitment to literacy looks like. And we hope that you have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. You did a fabulous job. You remind me of Oprah.
Best
That's how
compliment
good you
ever.
are.
Thank you all.
Hey,
so
thank you
very
guys.
much.
God bless you. Nice to meet all y'all.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
Keep
Have a
doing what
great
y'all
night.
doing. Woo-hoo.
Great to meet everybody. Take care.